The last two prep races for the 2018 Kentucky Derby were held this past Saturday, and both were very significant, both in terms of the horses that were going to qualify and be in the top 20 point standings, and also for the form of the horses that were already qualified, how their odds and how they ran were going to affect, of course, what will happen in Louisville for the Derby. I'll start. The two races were the Arkansas Derby and the Lexington. The Arkansas Derby had 100 points on the line for the winner. The Lexington only had 20. So for the Arkansas Derby, the favorite going in was Magnum Moon, trained by Todd Pletcher, and Magnum Moon had won the Rebel, which was also at Oaklawn Park, which is where the Arkansas Derby is run. And the top four finishers for the Arkansas Derby in order were Magnum Moon, Quip, Salamini, and Combatant. The top three will are qualified for the Derby and will be in barring a scratch. Combatant is right now 20th in terms of getting in, but he won't get in unless there's a scratch because one of the spots is reserved for Gronkowski, the European qualifier. So for now, Combatant, who's trained by Steve Asmussen, doesn't look like he's going to get in, but there's very possibly will be a scratch for a whole host of different reasons that happens. In terms of the race itself, as I mentioned, Magnum Moon was the favorite going in. He had looked so impressive in the Rebel. And I thought Magnum Moon did exactly what he had to do to win, and he definitely, I would say, cemented himself as a favorite for the Derby. Probably not the favorite, but one of the top 4, 5, or 6, depending on how you view the other favorites. In terms of how the race went, Magnum Moon had the lead just about from the beginning. For the first half mile, it wasn't a blistering fast pace, which I think did help Magnum Moon. Quip, who has speed ridden by Florent Geroux, a good jockey, but Quip was pushing him a little bit, but never really getting up to really hotly contest the pace. And I thought Magnum Moon held him off. And then right when he needed to, Magnum Moon really put it into high gear and separated himself from the field. He drifted a little bit at the very end. He's not going to be able to do that in the Kentucky Derby, but I'm not too concerned about it. Some other people might be, but for me, it's not that big of a deal, at least for now. But overall, Magnum Moon, like I said, he did what he had to do, and he really impressed. He's trained by Todd Pletcher, and he's a really, really visually impressive horse. He shares a bunch of things in common with Justify, actually, but that's one of the things is that he's very visually impressive. And that doesn't mean that he's gonna run great in any race. Certainly not. Doesn't guarantee that he's gonna run well in Louisville, but it's just something to point out. The other thing he has in common with Justify is that Magnum Moon didn't run as a 2-year-old. And of course, there's a lot of history in the Kentucky Derby about horses that didn't run as a 2-year-old. And for the most part, it's not good history. So they'll both be looking to break that trend, if you will. For some of the other horses, Quip, coming off of his big win in the Tampa Bay Derby, I thought he ran reasonably well here to finish second, and I think if you liked him going into the Arkansas Derby, based off of that Tampa Bay Derby performance, I don't think that there was necessarily a lot to not like. Maybe, there wasn't a ton to love, but he did what he had to do. He was already in the race, the Kentucky Derby anyway, no matter where he finished here. But to finish second in a good field like the Arkansas Derby was, I thought it was pretty good. And he showed a little bit of a ability to run in different ways in these different races, whether he's up top or coming just from off the pace just a little bit. Salamini, who wound up finishing third and actually finished second to Magnum Moon in the Rebel. He's trained by Bob Baffert, Salamini is, and he's a really tough horse. He always seems to run well, but he's been struggling to win lately. But I do like Salamini a lot, and I think he'll have decent odds for the Kentucky Derby, and I think he'll be a real threat to finish. I'm not sure that he's going to be able to win the Kentucky Derby. Maybe he will, but that might be a little too much to ask of him. But I think he's a serious threat to hit the board. And I think if you enjoy playing like the exactas and trifectas, or even the superfecta, Salamini will be definitely a horse to consider in those, just because of his ability to run hard. Um, he's just a really tough horse, and he always seems like he's coming on at the end. He only finished third here. I thought going in, to be honest, I thought he'd finish second, but it was really tight, that margin at the end. But yeah, like I said, I think looking forward to the Kentucky Derby, which he will be in, barring a scratch again. I think that he's a, again, we can you could probably argue back and forth whether or not he's actually a serious threat to win, but certainly, as I've mentioned in those, like an exacta ticket or trifecta, just like it last year, it's very common for horses that aren't right at the top of the odds to finish in those top slots in the Kentucky Derby. And I've mentioned this a bunch in my previous videos, but in a 20 horse field, which of course the Kentucky Derby is, those horses that always seem to give an honest effort and do well, they can be attractive in that situation, because there's probably going to be some adversity that they have to go through to get themselves in a position to finish in that top 5, let's say. One last thing about Salamini is I think, maybe he's labeled as one of these, tough horses that, as I mentioned, always seems to give an honest effort. But he does have a lot of talent, and he is trained by Bob Baffert. So I think you have to be careful to kind of label him in that way. So finishing up here, Combatant. Again, we'll see if he's in the Derby or not. Right now, he's on the outside looking in, but there's that potential that he could get in. He's actually somewhat similar to Salamini and all those things I said about Salamini. But I think if Combatant doesn't get into the Kentucky Derby, I don't think it's necessarily reason to fret if you like him, because I think he's a horse that could show up in either the Preakness or the Belmont and be, a contender in one of those races, or moving on from there going into the summer. So if you like Combatant, I wouldn't panic. So wrapping up the talk about the Arkansas Derby, congratulations to Magnamoon, a really, really impressive horse, and one that I'm really looking forward to seeing race in the Kentucky Derby. I do really like Magnamoon even before this Arkansas Derby, like I think a lot of people did. But he if it was possible, he even over exceeded expectations maybe. He looked really good here. So now moving on to Lexington. Really, the main storyline going into here was My Boy Jack. He's has the trainer jockey combination of the DeSormo brothers, and the DeSormo brothers have had horses in the Kentucky Derby, and most notably, potentially, was the 2016 Kentucky Derby. They had Exaggerator, who wound up finishing second. And My Boy Jack, we'll see. I'm not sure he has quite as a talent of Exaggerator, but we'll find that out. But going into this Lexington, well, first of all, it was a good field, and it was a fairly large field. Out, not even talking about My Boy Jack, as I've mentioned, a bunch of the horses, even if they won, they wouldn't have made it to the Kentucky Derby because they only would have gotten 20 points. But putting that aside for just a second, it was still a good field and fun. I was really impressed with the race. I thought a lot of horses ran well. And I thought it was by no means just like a sideshow thing. It was an impressive race. My Boy Jack, he is that deep closer, so he was fairly far early on. But like a good closer will do, he had his opening and he really ran hard, and he wound up just winning the race. And by getting those 20 points, he will be qualified for the Kentucky Derby, barring a scratch. And I thought you have to give a lot of credit for the ride to Desormeaux. Um, and I think, he, depending on, there's always a couple of closers, and I think you have to kind of pick out which one you like. Some people like closers more than others, so it's just kind of a personal preference. But he'll be um, a nice, interesting. I'm not sure he'll be a long shot. Somewhere between mid pack to a long shot. But I do think that he'll probably be bet somewhat heavily just because of you know the fact that he's ran well in his last couple of races, the Desormeaux brothers, and the fact that he's a closer, which can appeal to some people. Um, so that's the Arkansas Derby in the Lexington. So congratulations to the two winners, and they were two really good fields. Both races were fun to watch, and if you weren't able to watch them, I would recommend checking out the replays. So finally, we're about just about over 2 weeks from the Kentucky Derby, and it's shaping up as a really, really good field. There's several horses right at the top that will be vying to be considered, the favorite. We'll see who the morning line favorite's going to be, and then from there, how it changes up until post time. And I think it is a little different maybe from recent derbies in that there are up to maybe 6 or 7 horses that can seriously make a claim for being one of the top 2 favorites. So it just kind of depends. I think there's going to be a wide ranging opinions about who the top horses are. But the cool thing about this derby is not only are there those horses at the top that look really good, but there's also I'd say at least 6 or 7 right behind them that are good looking horses with good trainers and that will run hard in the Derby and will contend to, will give those favorites everything that they can handle. So it's a really exciting and interesting field. Last thing for Derby news, and of course I'll be making a lot of videos leading up to the Derby with my last previews and maybe a couple predictions. But the last thing is, and somewhat sad news, Runaway Ghost, who won the Sunland Derby, picked up an injury and had to be scratched. And that was, I don't know the severity of it at this point. I hope it's not too serious and he'll be able to make a comeback. But he definitely will not be running in the Kentucky Derby. So that was disappointing because he was actually a pretty good looking horse. And he had a really impressive Sunland Derby win. But that's unfortunate. On the flip side of that is it allowed Firenze Fire to get into the race, the Kentucky Derby that is. And Firenze Fire is actually a horse that I like probably maybe more than some other people do. He's run okay in his last couple starts, but he has a lot of experience. And we'll see, if he is in fact in the gates for the Kentucky Derby, how he does. Like I said, I think I probably like him a little bit more than some other people. But we'll see. I'm not sure whether he's a threat to win. But on the other hand, it is sometimes cool, no matter how they run, it's always exciting when a horse gets into the Kentucky Derby because it's such a big and prestigious race that just to be in it is a cool thing. So thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed the prep season, and we're getting ready for the Kentucky Derby now.